The first 3 minutes of this video are only about trauma work regarding brushing, so if you're only interested in the settling process, skip to 3:06. Tsonga's looking around here, but there are no signs of stress in his face. I actually prefer him interacting over him not being interested at all. It shows that he's neither shut down nor is the food overriding his anxiety. There is a moment of me brushing him while his head is still out of the bucket, but I quickly remember that the way we are using this start button, his consent starts when his head is in the bucket. So I just wait for him. He presents as mouthy here because he's trying to get the treats right from the source, but I just redirect him back to the bucket. Since he's being so nice about it, I don't see it as a problem.
Good job.
If I remember correctly, he spooked at his herd running around in the background. But that's some good self-regulation there. He just jumps away and then he comes right back to the bucket. Yeah, I apologize in advance, but this video is going to have a lot of sped up sections and still manage to be really long. He tells me off here, and that's fair enough, because I didn't use the mounting blocks, so I didn't stay in the predictable context of the start button. Remember, the start button is a promise, and I did break that here. Usually I would use the nose target to redirect him into position, but because I didn't have it on me, I just used the bucket. Moving them with the bucket only works if they are not food anxious, so be careful about that. This section is sped up because he's doing so well and you have seen him do well in other videos. He only ever takes his head out of the bucket when he finishes the treats. Except for this moment, here I think he's gently telling me to not touch that specific spot. Boring treat refill sequence. And finally to the settling process.
Good job.
If you watched the last video, you can see now that in comparison to that, he is much calmer now and he doesn't mind at all that I put a saddle pad on him. I have said before that for this particular horse, the mounting is rarely an issue. However, the girthing includes trauma. This is why for this horse I chose to put the step of putting weight on before putting the saddle on, even though that might seem counterintuitive at first. But it makes sense if you remember that trauma is non-linear. I start with swinging my leg over before I actually sit on, and there was no problem. So here I proceed to the next step, which is gently sliding onto his back, and that is no problem either. It's so much not a problem that he doesn't even bother taking the treats from my hand.
Oh, good job.
The mounting was no problem, so now it's time for the saddle. I removed the girth from the saddle to not repeat my big mistake from last session, which was the girth flopping against his belly, which he really hated. As expected, just the saddle on is no problem. For a split second I think of already attaching the girth on the other side, but then I change my mind and first break up the counter conditioning regarding the girth into smaller steps. That starts with the very simple but important step of just hovering it above the area. The following step is to gently press the girth into the girth area without having it attached to the saddle. Again, this time moving it and making noise.
Good job.
Next step, making louder noises with the girth, because I had noticed before that the sound had an effect on him. One more of those with more duration, check. I go around to the other side to attach the girth to the saddle, and he's looking at me as if to tell me to not forget the mounting block. What a smart horse.
Good job.
Only attaching the girth on one side seems to be no problem. Waddling back around the horse with my mounting block as I should.
Good job.
Time to fill up the treats, because we don't want to be running out of treats in the middle of girthing up. Fiddling with the billets does not bother him. The next micro step is to only reach underneath his belly for the girth, but to not actually grab it. And it's good that I broke it down into smaller steps, because here he is looking at me to see what I'm doing, maybe even a tiny bit worried. When I then reach and hold the girth loose and shake it a bit, he's okay with it. Now adding more steps together, reaching, taking, and then moving the billet. And he takes his head out of the bucket, but he's not worried. When the horse ends up being ready for us to attach the girth, you want it to be as loose as possible, which is why I used the first hole. Lots of treats for a big reward. And then, but only if the horse is ready for this step, you start girthing up one hole at a time.
Good job. Good job.
Even tightening the girth and adjusting the pad is no problem, which is such a big progress for this horse.
Good job.
Then I move on to the other side to tighten the girth evenly. And this might be a bit more difficult for some horses if you have started the start button on only one particular side, but it can be no big deal like for Tsonga. Here is a small sequence of me just adjusting the saddle a bit further, and Tsonga not being bothered in the slightest.
Good job. Good job.
Accidentally threw treats into his eye. Poor thing. Since there is nothing interesting to comment on here, I'm just gonna mention my gorgeous primary school kid sun hat. But you know, the sun in New Zealand is very harsh, gotta be sun smart. Another highly entertaining sequence of collecting spillage. I move on to trying to sit on him with the saddle on. And for my first attempt, he looks at me to check what I'm doing, but he's not grumpy about it. When I put my leg over, he looks at me again, which is a good sign paired with his soft facial expression, because it means that he is participating in what we're doing and making sure that I do it correctly. But I also stick to our start button promise that I stop whenever he takes the head out of the bucket. Just then, he didn't take his head out of the bucket, which I don't necessarily strive for because I want him to notice that I get onto his back, since we want them to engage their back when we're sitting on them, so we need them to notice. But because this is also the start button context, I still have to stop when he takes his head out of the bucket. Except for the moment where I give him treats from my hands, which I do to positively load the context of sitting on. If I had actually wanted to ride, I wouldn't have gotten on in the start button context, but with the mounting block away from the bucket.
Nice.
And since untacking can be part of the trauma, it should also be part of the trauma undoing work. So don't forget about it and see if you need to use a start button to untack. Note to self, stop throwing saddles. What a bad habit. The last 3 minutes of this video are only here because of continuity, but if you want to watch me being really slow at realizing that his nervous system is increasingly telling me that it is over brushing, here's some music for you. Enjoy.